All right, thank you for staying with Citizen TV Monday Report. Let's continue that discussion on where are the learners. You're saying that there seems to be a need to consolidate all these funds so that the more than 131,000 are still out get a chance in school, but not everyone agrees. Janet, is this a good idea to consolidate the funding so that, and who would administer these funds anyway? Would it be done by government?
You know, save for the fact that we are so used as a country to telling each other lies and wanting to massage each other. Fact remains that it is improper to place such funding in the hands of politicians for obvious reasons. And I do not know why government could prefer such alternative ways of funding education. If this is a country that is talking about free education for all, and if this is a country where the government, through the Ministry of Education, has said that we have sent money to schools, we have funded schools fully, the moral question there is, why do we need all this money, you know, flowing left, right, and center? And then the other question is about how much. Even when we want to tell politicians that they are spending monies, how much are they spending per child? In constituencies such as Kasarani, such as Ruiru, you would find a member of parliament giving even 3,000 shillings. MCAs are giving 1,000 shillings. So really, the idea of saying that when you collect from the member of parliament, you shouldn't collect from the member or from the MCA. But 3,000 plus 1,000 equals 4,000. It is not even.
Why consolidating it would make more sense. It is not that you give a block amount rather than everybody giving.
I think for me the conversation here should not be involving government. Let us talk about Equity Bank's benevolence to support the children of Kenya in the vision for education. Let us talk about KCB, but we are not going to speak about government failing to channel money through globally tested models and preferring tokenizing education. We saw the government increasing bursaries the other day and not increasing money is meant for capitation. And we know so well that who knows the needy children? A member of parliament that is newly elected in a constituency, for example, does not know who is needy and who is not. And politicians, I being one, have got their own criteria for awarding bursaries. They would probably be having 1 million, and then everybody shows up, and they would give everybody a form and divide all that money. Everybody gets 2,000, 2,000, 2,000. What exactly are we doing? And the other day I saw some advice saying that the Ministry of Gender and something, they also have bursaries, 274 million shillings in bursaries. And I was like, is this government serious? Why can't we consolidate all that money? We have principals crying left, right, and center every particular day that we have not been sent sufficient monies at schools. Why are we getting luxuries to
saying consolidate all the money and increase the capitation rather than give it as bursaries?
Use it, give that money through the schools, and we will not have quarrel with anybody. Children and parents should not be queuing under the hot sun, appeasing politicians and other people for them to be able to get 2,000, 3,000 shillings. Really, the self-esteem of people is being lost under pursuing children's, rights to education.
Prof, how did you envision this in the report? So who would run this fund and how would it be distributed?
Well, thanks, Trevor. It's not just about what we envisioned, but I've also had the privilege of sitting in the committee that is developing the bills to implement some of the recommendations. And hopefully in the next month or two, we'll be able to have the opportunity of debating what is being called the scholarships and bursaries in basic education bill. And several things that bill is grappled with and make proposal about. Number one is that we need to put the disparate scholarships into a coordinated framework so that the left hand knows what the right hand is doing. And the idea is to establish an entity, not for politicians, but an entity at the national level that coordinates the award of that scholarship. Currently, we have the Jomo Kenyatta Foundation that does a little bit of it, but just does a little bit of it. If we can expand that and have the bulk of the funds managed under that, there are several things that will happen. The first one is that we'll then be able to have a database of two things, a database of the needy students, that what is happening now of following kids after the school, you heard me talking about it, we can be able to follow those kids much earlier so that we're able to know here are our kids based on a criteria who are needy. What that will then mean is that the people that Janet was talking about, that the equities and the KCBs of this world, with time, we don't have to go around also looking for people. They can go to that database and say, if you go to Asumbi, where I come from, here is the list of needy kids that have gone into that list, identified through the local processes, identified through the awards, and somebody can go and say, I'll pick child 1, I'll pick child 2, I'll pick child 3. Number 2, that database will be able to let us know how much money has been allocated to which child. It will then avoid this situation where people get 3,000 shillings, but more importantly, also avoid double dipping, where I get money from Equity, and I get money from KCB, and I get money from JKF. The fourth thing it can be able to do is can be able to have some levels of transparency and accountability. And with time, we can be able to have a situation where the people, even some of the guys in private sector, can be able to say, if this fund is being run efficiently, if I have 20 million, as opposed to spending money to go also and look for kids in the village, I can actually put this money into this fund, and there's a much more transparent manner of working on it. I think one of the last things that we'll have to then debate, which is the more difficult thing, is whether the political class will also be able to say, no, look, it is not our responsibility to run these bursaries. Our responsibility should be the responsibility of oversight. Can we ensure we move this into that? I'm hoping that when the debate comes, we'll be able to have a much candid debate. The last one is...
But that will take away all their leverage. There's a likelihood of being shot down from the onset.
And that's why I'm hoping we're having this debate, because then we can be able... The reality is that we have seen from the 131,000 kids who don't have money that something is broken. So we can as well decide to close our eyes to the whole problem and continue crying about this 131,000, or say, no. Look, the problem we have is not just a problem of insufficient money. There may be a problem of sufficient money, but the bigger problem we have is a problem of equitable distribution. I am sure if you looked at those kids, every county has kids who have not gone to school, and we're just talking with you offline. There are members of parliament with the CDF, there's national government with money through JKF, there's county governments with money, there's private sector. Yet these kids are not going to school. I know in my county, for example, we're having a debate amongst professionals and even a few people who are in government, and asking, how can there be 40,000 kids who have not gone to school? What can we do about it? I think with a much more concerted process, we can be able to reduce the numbers from 131,000 to 0. Because if we promise the children under Article 53 of the Constitution that there's going to be free primary education for those 131,000 kids, that right is being violated, and we must do something about it.
Okay. Dr. Manyasa, let me bring you back in on this. And I was speaking to Dr. Riechi earlier on before we had this conversation, and he was part of the team that developed the Professor Douglas Odhiambo Task Force report on aligning education to Kenya Vision 2030 and the Constitution of Kenya 2010 between 2011 to 2013. That's about 10 years ago. One of their strongest recommendations more than a decade ago was first, standardize all schools in terms of equipment, teachers, infrastructure, and then abolish all boarding schools. Because we are agreeing here that education is expensive. So why don't you just abolish boarding schools? Therefore, the students who were speaking to Citizen TV, some of them who've been called to 900 kilometers away schools, don't have to go there, as long as the schools are standardized. Is this a practical approach?
It is actually not practical, and I'll give you reasons. One, if we say today that boarding schools are expensive, first let me demystify the story of we should look to government for funding and everything should be government. Our government funds for 58% of the cost of education. 38% of that is borne by parents of the cost of education currently, and about 6 to 7% is borne by other actors, the Equities and the KCBs and Safaricom Foundation and others. So parents, whom we haven't spoken about today, must also be engaged with around the issue of how do they make their share of the contribution available to schools to enable schools to function. I think that is a debate we are missing, and it's important that we don't miss it. The second idea is this issue of boarding schools are costly. If boarding schools are costly, it means one of two things. One, that principals are exploiting parents. Why? Because it should be cheaper to feed 100 children together because of economies of scale than to feed 100 children in 100 different homes. Because the cost of boarding that the child is supposed to bear in school is what they are supposed to be bearing when they are at home. So if it becomes expensive to feed that child in school than to feed that child at home, it means either the principal is overcharging or that child will be at home but going to bed hungry. The cheap part of it will be that they are not getting what they are getting in school. And I don't think that that is a good fact if we are trying to give every Kenyan child an equal opportunity to education. That we'll tell this child, you come here during the day, go home, sleep hungry. Another one of your colleagues goes home, has a 3-course meal, then come back and meet here tomorrow and continue with studies. We have given you a fair playing field. So if it is expensive to keep children in school, either we are overcharging parents or a lot of those children will be living a much worse life at home than they are living at school. And so the question is, do we really want to make children who come from homes that are difficult to commute from, socially and economically, to commute from those homes, and then we can claim that we are giving them a fair chance at school? Let us look at the results that just came out. We had 48,000 E's. Where are those E's? 90% of them are in the schools are in the day schools.
Yeah.
And those children are not stupid. Those children are simply learning in environments that are not conducive for learning.
Hence the reason why the report wanted a standardization first in terms of equipment, teachers and infrastructure before the transition.
So standardization is fine, but it's easier said than done.
Okay. Janet, it's been 10 years.
How much time will it take to put Oriwa Secondary School to the level of Alliance?
Okay. Let me hear what other parents have to say on this.
Yeah, I think Dr. Manyasa seemed to be giving up very quickly. And here where we are is not where we were 13 years ago. So we keep pressing for progress. We keep pressing for progress. And we look at it from the bigger perspective. Yeah. And the bigger perspective, in fact, is that we cannot continue to do education the way we are doing it. It is no longer sustainable. Even when you leave out the issues of the known, talked about sources of funding, individuals such as yourself, I know that you may not be listed as one of the persons that have provided bursary, but I know that you could have taken 1 or 2 children to school. Same to me. I've taken about 17 of them, and so many other people, including Prof here. You hear they're having a conversation, and so there are so many other forms of contribution that are not talked about. That tells you something, that probably either the cost of education that has been put on paper is fake, or it is not in the actuals, or there are so many other transactions here that have been made mandatory, and that probably, if they are looked at very keenly, they are not even enablers of learning. And I always like looking at it from the component of, for example, when you take a child to secondary school, what exactly are you paying for? Why we are saying that boarding schools are expensive is because boarding schools are what is constituting this burden that you see. Because when a parent is walking around with a fee structure of about 70,000, because that is what it is now, and another one that is not spoken about of the uniform that you will encounter when you get to school, ranging from 30,000 to something like that. Total that together and you'll get a figure of 100,000. How many households in this country today can be able to support that kind of a fee structure without seeking help? And this seeking help is what now they're saying. They go to churches. I'm aware even in my church there have been fundraisers for children. That has not been counted in what we are speaking about, as bursaries. And so there is actually need for us to have a conversation as to whether how we are doing education. Is it sustainable anymore? And that is why we are saying this business of having children sleep in the school is really causing, is adding up so many other costs. And not only costs, teachers are so much preoccupied with non-learning issues. For example, making sure the children are well disciplined while in school, and so many other encumbrances. That is the boarding component. And when the government is saying, we are catering for free day secondary school. So the boarding component is entirely the responsibility of the parent.
Yeah.
That is where the conversation is about.
Okay.
Because this boarding conversation is what is exaggerating the household budget.
Okay.
The cost, the burden is not even as to the government so much, because the government is very clear about their part of the burden.
Okay.
And their part of the burden is up to the tuition. But the boarding function, that is left to households. And that is the conversation that we want to have.
Interjection before I bring in Prof. Manyasa.
Sorry. I would be happy if Mdoni was telling me all the children who have not reported to school were admitted to boarding schools.
Okay.
And I'll give you many names of children called to day schools who are not in school now. Because the uniform is not a boarding school function.
Yeah.
It's in all schools. Mm-hmm. The point I'm making is simple. We can make the school system more efficient.
Yeah.
And we will be able to be fairer to every child without necessarily. Just the other day, I was taking girls to grade 1 in a boarding school in a county that you cannot afford to be a day scholar. Yeah. Because the closest primary school is 50 kilometers away. They have gone to grade 1 in boarding school.
Okay. And actually, Daktari is agreeing with me when I'm saying that there is a conversation that needs to be had about all these requirements that we are asking of children. Yeah. The other day, I was home in a primary school called Ngereka Goro Primary School, where I come from. And the children, 2 children came to me and told me, please help us. We have not been able to transition to grade 7. And I'm like, I mean, why? Because you should just walk from grade 6 to grade 7. And they told me no. They had a paper. You must come with a brand new set of uniform, 2 sets of them, and then 4,500 for food. So this child that was not eating in schools when they were in grade 6, now because they have moved to junior secondary school, now they must eat in a program and the parent must part with 4,500. You know, that is a conversation that I am saying that we must have, and we avoid all these inconveniences and all these barriers that we are putting, including we need to have a conversation about this piece called uniform. What is it for at the end of the day?
Prof.
You saw me smiling. Yes. Because the debate that my good friends are having is a debate we had for around 8 months in the Presidential Working Party. And I think there are 3 ideas that they raise that are also included in that report that I think we need to discuss. The first one is what you talk about the Douglas Odhiambo Task Force. Even in the Munavu Task Force report, there's a proposal for what is called a minimum essential package, which is to say, what is it that schools require to run? What's the minimum essential package that every school should be allocated in terms of capitation, irrespective of the number of children that the number of learners that you have, because of certain things that are fixed. If you require water, that's fixed. If you require a watchman, that's fixed. Even if you have 2. So dealing with that is something that I think government must be able to roll out so we are able to stabilize the resources that go to school. The second thing is this conversation about boarding schools. A huge debate that we had. In fact, at some point, we were of the view that let us ban boarding schools completely. Then the debate then came in terms of, but you see, you have places like ASAL regions, in terms of security, you need to deal with that kind of thing. But I think, in principle, the boarding component actually increases the cost of education. That's a fact. So therefore, we must do something to be able to reduce the cost of education and focus much more on day schools as opposed to boarding schools. But we need to do 2 things. The first one is we need to ensure that the quality of those day schools is such that it is up to a level where kids that go there don't have to suffer, like Manyasa is saying, and get their ease. The second is if you look at junior secondary schools, and I think that's something we forget, the fact that they were placed in the primary school has meant that kids who would have been forced to go to boarding school in Form 1 stayed next to their places, and that has reduced a little bit of the cost. I think the conversation we need to start having is how do we ensure when we reach senior school, we are maintaining the same pattern so that people are not going 50 kilometers, as Manjana said, or 85 kilometers, but people are going to within their locales. But that requires that our thinking, where in the past we were sending much more capitation to national schools for infrastructure improvement, must be reversed. So we send much more money to the schools next to people so that people don't have to come to Alliance. They don't have to go to Maseno. they can go to Andingo Secondary School next to their village to improve them. That's the second thing. The third, which is a big elephant in the room, and I think something we're discussing even as part of developing the laws, is that unfortunately, we have commercialized the supporting infrastructure for schools. It's an unfortunate reality across the country. You will find that uniform costs much more than their normal price. That when you go to buy a uniform, the amount you're being asked to pay for it. That's why this parent was saying in today's newspapers, not my words, I have spent 30,000, I was told it was on uniform, now I must get another 30,000 for fees. We must be able to deal with it, and we must be able to think radically. On the one instance, there are people who say, get rid of uniform. You'll be told, there are countries like Ghana where you don't have uniform, there are countries where you don't have budgets. On the other, people tell you, but no, those uniforms are important for purposes to maintain discipline. We need to strike a balance, but whichever way the balance is struck, we must ensure that the prices of those uniforms are not too expensive. Some of us in the Working Party even suggested, why can't those uniforms be made by NYS? So that the prices are known, so that you know what you must do is remove the incentive for it being a source of corruption. You must bring it down, because I don't believe that a shirt for somebody in primary school, in Form 1, should cost us much more than 1,000 shillings. When you start hearing that the shirt is 8,000 shillings or 7, something is mad. During the Working Party, somebody told us, I went to some school, which I won't name, but the amount of money I was being asked to pay for uniform was more than the fees. Unacceptable. So we must find, because surely uniform cannot be as expensive as a suit for somebody who is coming to work at Royal Media Service. And those are the things that we must be able to address.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we run out of time here, but I know there's a lot that we can talk about. We'll still have this conversation again at a future time as the government does the mop-up of the students who are still out there. Dr. Emmanuel Manyasa, Executive Director of SAWA Agenda, Janet Mudhoni Ouko, former Education CEC Nairobi, and Professor Collins Odote, Member Presidential Working Party on Education Reforms.